Hello everyone, and welcome to week 1 of the ELIC MOOC. My name is Adrian Millward-Sadler and I'm here today to talk to you about engineering literacies. I'm from the Department of Automotive Engineering here in Graz at the University of Applied Sciences Joanneum, and my objective today is to take you through what literacies are, because there's a couple of problems. First of all, we have the problem that not everybody has the same understanding of what literacy is. So I'll take you through the different understandings of literacies, and then my final objective is to try and make sure that we're all on the same page, so that when we go through the subsequent weeks in the MOOC, everyone is coming from the same place. Okay, so let's start with, what does literacy mean? Well, it's not a universal concept, and that's the problem. And the problem can be seen in two different parts. So I'll look at part number 1 first, I'll call that problem number 1, and then we'll have a look at problem number 2. Problem number 1. Literacy has different meanings in different languages. Now, if we just take French and English for a start, if you have French, you look at the word analphabétisme, and that means someone who cannot read. Now, in English, this would be illiterate. But when we say illiterate, we then obviously, when someone can read, we talk about a literate person. But then when we talk about literacy, that's not necessarily the same thing. French makes a difference. It makes a distinction between these two things. There is la littératie. Now, la littératie refers to a set of skills a person needs, in particular in information societies, to be able to function in those societies. So the first thing that we need to understand is, what do we mean by literacy? And we need to be aware that maybe the language that we come from, I come from the English language, but maybe my meaning isn't the same as the next person's meaning who comes from a different language. That's problem number 1, but one I think which is quite easy to get around as soon as we're aware of the problem. Problem number 2, on the other hand, comes in more parts. First of all, the basic problem is that literacy itself has different meanings in different fields. It can be understood in 4 different ways. It can be understood as a set of skills. It can be understood as applied and practiced in a situation. It can be understood as a learning process, and it can be understood simply as a text. I'll run through each of these now just to give a broader explanation, and then we'll look at how these can actually make a difference to what we want to do with the ELIC MOOC and engineering literacy. Let's start with literacy as skills. Now, when I say literacy as skills, I'm talking about tangible skills, usually such as reading, writing and speaking. That's the first thing that people think of, and maybe that's close to this idea of literacy as I first explained in English, the ability to read. But certainly in technical fields, this literacy can refer to numeracy. That is the mathematical ability or a mathematical proficiency in processing. It can refer to technical literacy. That is skills applied to the workplace and the surroundings that you find yourself in. And it can refer to informational literacy. That is the ability to access information and communicate via technology. The second thing, literacy as applied and practiced. Now, this can be seen as a functional literacy. And this explains why you have people who are very, very capable communicators in one context, but maybe not in another. It is literacy that's appropriate to a certain event. Now, take someone who's very, very good perhaps at writing technical texts, technical manuals, but then really, really struggles when it comes to writing a master's thesis, an academic thesis. These would be 2 separate literacy events, and they're functionally very literate at one, but not at the other. The third example is literacy as a learning process. Now, this moves, as you might imagine, much more towards the pedagogic. And the idea is that as individuals learn, they become more literate. Learning, therefore, in itself increases literacy. If you think back to your times at university in your didactic classes, you'll think of things like constructivist learning, which enables people to make sense of what they learn. That's very much part of this, as are the communities of practice proposed by people like Levenwenger. So that would be literacy as a learning process. Finally, we also have literacy as text. Now, that's a subject matter, and that would be very easy to understand, except for the fact that, of course, texts vary. And texts vary according to subject, genre, the complexity of language used, and ideological content. And as if that weren't enough, we now have new literacies or new media which are available to disseminate text. New media which has mostly come into the domain of education in the last 20 years. Now this could be as simple as websites, video, email, SMS messages. Then we have what some people call Web 1.5, the use of Moodle, the use of wikis, the use of e-portfolios, where there is some two-way interaction, but it's still mainly a one-sided interaction. And finally we have Web 2.0, where there really is two-way action going on. So things like Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Snapchat. Now, if you look at this graphic, you can see that the average age of a high school teacher, according to a recent survey, is 43. And this is a worldwide average. I'm 44. That makes me the perfect normal teaching age. I teach at university, but the students are between 19 and 23. If you think about high school students, they're probably aged between 14 and 18. So we have a disconnect here. If we have a 43-year-old average age teacher and a maximum 19-year-old student, there's still 24 years between them. And in that time, we have this influence of new media. This is the new literacies disconnect, where people of my age group tend to have a different mindset to the people of the age group that we're teaching. And I'm a perfectly good example of how bad this can be. I would much rather still use pen and paper. I know that that is not the case with some of my students. In 2017, we carried out an investigation in our department, just in automotive engineering, to get an idea of what the literacies were that our students were using and what the literacies were that we use. And what we found was quite interesting. Our students, who ranged between 19 and 24, 25, used quite different media to access text than we did. So we were offering things like websites, and that could be Moodle, that could be the main website. We were offering wikis, we were offering e-portfolios, online forums, glossaries, quizzes, and chat rooms as well in certain cases. This is not, however, what our students were using. Our students came back to us and said, yes, we use website, but we don't use the Moodle. That was new for us, we had to learn that. They use YouTube. Now that is something that we're beginning to use, but we're catching up with our students. They use Facebook, they use Snapchat, they use Instagram, they use WhatsApp. So they're using a variety of texts that are quite different to the text that we're using to try and educate them. So this is what I call the new literacies disconnect. And if we then bring this all together, we can see that there is some ground to cover. Now, let's move towards a definition of literacy for ELIC. And what I then thought would be a good idea, let's have a look out there. Let's see what the definitions are of literacy in the kind of fields that we work in. So I started with STEM, and a common definition in STEM of literacy is this: the ability to identify, apply, and integrate concepts from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to understand complex problems and to innovate and solve them. Well, this to me, that sounds like a combination of skills and applied and practiced literacies. So we have 1 and 2. So I carried on. Then I went to the accreditation board for engineering and technology, ABET. They accredit 776 universities. Engineering courses currently are in 31 countries around the world. I thought that would be a good place to start. How do they define engineering literacy? They say it is knowledge of the mathematical and natural sciences gained by study, experience and practices, applied to utilize materials and forces to the benefit of mankind. Okay. Again, that sounds rather like the first and second literacies I described, skills and literacy as applied and practiced and situated. It also sounds to me a bit like we have some epistemology coming in, so this is getting even more complicated. Let's go to another one. Let's go to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. They say literacy is understanding of how technologies are developed via the engineering design process. Okay. That sounds like number 1, that sounds like skills to me, but then they go on and they say it is also the ability to systematically and creatively apply scientific and mathematical principles to practical ends. So we come back to practices again. So This definition of what is engineering literacy is obviously rather slippery. It's not so easy to really nail down. We have multiple definitions, and what we find is we need to make sure that we have a definition for ELIC, which everyone can work from, of what literacy, engineering literacy is. Now, ELIC, as stated, stands for Interdisciplinary Teaching Through Practical Examples that combine natural science subjects and technical sciences input. So, in that case, ELIC's engineering literacy must relate to the learning process of school pupils. That's the third category of literacy I talked about. And it must aid in increasing their engineering skills. Well, that's the first category of literacy I spoke about. And it has to help them become more functional in this field, so it's applied in practice. That's the second category of literacy I spoke about. And it must do this via a connection of natural and technical sciences. Now, we need to adapt texts via the integration of new literacies, and that's the final category of literacy I spoke about. And this hopefully should further align teachers and students in their working together and help increase student understanding or pupil understanding of the subject that they're studying. So, in the next section, I'm going to show you 2 examples of new media and how they can be used with students in engineering and natural sciences subjects. They help hopefully link these 2 things together and form a bridge for the students to go from theory into practice.